a challenge now, I think, is how do we implement different instructional tools in your classes and different assignments, and how do you engage the students? Because if the students aren't interested and don't see the value in what you're trying to teach them, they're going to tune out. They're not going to remember. But if they get excited in your class, if they can see, why is this relevant to me? Then I think you have them hooked, and then you're able to engage with them more and get them excited about what they're doing. And I think we still, though, fall back often into that PowerPoint where I'm just going to passively share information with you. But we know that a lot of students don't learn that way. And even if they're retaining the material, are they getting excited about the material? And if they're not excited about it and that interest isn't piqued, they're going to move on. And they're not going to want to either stay in your major, or when we talk about the poultry industry, like trying to get more students interested in it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Poultry Podcast. My name is Jason Emmert, and today we're visiting with Dr. Elizabeth Karcher, who is a professor of animal sciences at Purdue University. She has a background in immunobiology and nutritional science and holds a bachelor's degree from Penn State, a master's degree from Purdue, and a PhD from Iowa State. Dr. Karcher teaches a number of courses and is focused on the scholarship of teaching and learning. It's no surprise to me that she has received numerous teaching and impact awards at the university and national levels. And being someone who is primarily focused on teaching, I'm very excited about this conversation. So, Dr. Karcher, welcome to the Poultry Podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me today.
Yeah, it's great to have you with us. And we like to start off just finding out a little bit about our guests' academic journeys. Kind of tell us a little bit about how you ended up where you are today.
Sure. So as I already mentioned, I started at Penn State. I went there thinking I was going to be a small animal veterinarian. Obviously, that didn't happen. That wasn't the path that I ended up going. But I got really interested while I was there in dairy nutrition and learning more about what it meant to do graduate research and be a part of that community. So when I finished at Penn State, I decided to go to Purdue for my master's. And I worked in dairy nutrition with Sean Donkin while I was here. And so my interest kept going, and went to Iowa State, like you mentioned, and I was really fortunate there to work with the USDA as part of my PhD program looking at Johne's disease in dairy cattle. And then I went on to do a postdoc at Michigan State, became a faculty member at Michigan State, and I was there about 8 years. And while I was there, I noticed that my interest really started to shift a little bit more from doing research in dairy and nutrition and health, and really looking more at how are my students learning. I was always passionate about teaching, and I started realizing that there's research questions you can ask about that. So it was great at Michigan State to start that journey, and then my position at Purdue opened up about 8 years ago, and it provided me the opportunity to do scholarship in teaching and learning as my primary research. So I took that opportunity and moved here, and it's been great so far. So.
Working with nature and not against it. Chickens fed AX3 Digest consume significantly less feed and water to produce 1 pound of meat. Successful flock performance is determined during the first 10 days post-placement. AX3 Digest is a highly digestible novel protein that most improved in barn performance, bird health, and a drier litter. For more information, visit www.protecta.com.
That's wonderful. And did Purdue sort of create this position, carve that out with a really intentional focus on teaching and learning? Because I think that's just so fascinating that you have that kind of position.
Yeah, so the position itself was originally looking for somebody who could help run the undergraduate program, had an idea about curriculum, was able to do research. And so when I first started, we talked a lot as to whether or not I would continue some of the dairy research or really go down that road of looking at the teaching and learning. And as I did more in that area and was able to show that there's a lot of external grants that you can receive and was successful in that area, it really just became what people expected that I would be able to do. And it became a niche in our department that has been really exciting. So I'm not sure if that was the initial plan because I'm not sure if everybody's aware of that you can get promoted in the in academics and that in scholarship of teaching and learning. But it's been an incredible journey here as we've all kind of been learning that together. So.
Yeah, I think it's a great model for really any university, any animal sciences program, or lots of programs within colleges of agriculture to see how having somebody in that kind of position is both a resource for faculty, resource for students, and somebody moving the needle within a discipline on teaching and learning. It's just really important. And unfortunately, you don't have to stay up late every night reading all the journal articles on teaching and learning in poultry. It's just a pretty small pot right now.
Yep. Yeah, that's an area we've been trying to think a little bit more about. How do we add to that literature using poultry as the context and all the challenges we can talk about today with our students and getting them interested in the industry and some of those aspects. Yep.
Absolutely. Now, one thing I want to go back to, because before I forget, I think it's interesting. There's probably quite a few people listening, and I know for myself and a lot of our faculty, you mentioned having started on that pre-vet path, and you end up on a different path. Is that something you also see in quite a few students? Because I know it causes our students a lot of angst, but we try to help them understand there's so many different things you can do.
Yeah, so I teach our Introduction to Animal Agriculture course in the fall, and there's 180 students in that course. And when I ask them the first day, they're primarily first-year students. I would say 90% of them raise their hand that they want to be small animal veterinarians. And we've thought a lot about why. And some of that, I think, is students just aren't aware growing up of all the opportunities of things to do with animal besides just veterinary medicine. And we've looked in a little bit, we found, or I haven't found, but people in the literature and people have been doing these studies have looked at career identity of students. And it's found as early as elementary school for many of our students. So if you grow up your whole life saying, I'm going to be a vet, and then you go to school and higher education and you realize maybe you don't want to go, you didn't know these other opportunities were there, it's really hard for a lot of students to sort of come to terms with that because that's what they were always going to do. And so I always remember from my unique background, or my background's not so unique, right? It's like for many of the other students, I always try to remember that when I'm working with the first year students, that it's a journey for them and discovery of all these different things you can do in animal science that they just don't know about. So, and some will be veterinarians, right? We need veterinarians, and some have been on that path the whole time, but the majority of them will find a different path throughout their 4 years with us. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I encounter students all the time who almost have a mindset, if they decide not to go to vet school, that they're quitting something. And I tell them, you're not in vet school. You're not quitting vet school. It's okay. You're just finding a different path. But you're right. They've been connected to that dream, that goal for so long. And it's hard to make a change.
Yeah, they get worried too that maybe family members will be upset if they change because that's just the expectation of what they might do. And so we talk a lot in our department about the 3 plan A's. So yes, veterinary medicine might be your plan A, but what's your next plan A? What other internships can you do in addition to getting, working with a veterinarian? And even if you end up going to vet school, like what are internships you can do with companies and in the industries to make your application stand out? Everyone's going to have the veterinary hours that they need to apply. But what will make you different from all the other students? Because vet school just keeps getting more and more competitive. And so it's if you really want to do it, there's things you can do to be a little bit strategic and give you the most background so you're successful in your vet program when you move on. So,
sometimes we advise students if they're having that conversation with family and they think that might be a difficult conversation, to maybe start with, hey, today I decided to save over $100,000. And, be open with that.
Yeah, I mean, the amount that we see right now of student debt outside of undergraduate, but outside of veterinary medicine, as well as some of the other issues that are people are having to work through in the industry right now or in that profession, you really have to want it, and you really have to be passionate and really committed to doing that. And so some students will discover that, and others some will go to vet school and after the first semester realize this isn't what I wanted, or that realization, and then they'll find the right way or where they're going to end up. But it's really hard. I advise students here at Purdue, academic advisor for several, and we have a lot of those tough conversations where they're torn. They're trying to figure out what's best for them. And students are young. Most of them are 18 to 22-year-olds. So they're still discovering, what really they get passionate about, right? Because if they're not passionate about something, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt's a lot to go into if you're not really passionate and committed and excited about it. So
it is. That's right. Now, another thread I wanted to pick up on, because I think it's a pretty common thread with lots of people we talk to on the podcast and with a lot of us in general, is you've had some career changes, right? Mm-hmm. Some changing directions. Can you talk about that process a little bit? Or because sometimes I'm talking to colleagues or students and they're curious, how do you know when it's time, or what are some of the clues that kind of indicate maybe a change is a good way to go? I'm really leading you into this very poorly, but if you have anything to say about that, yeah.
I understand. So yeah, I mean, it was a tough decision to leave Michigan State and move on to Purdue University. I had wonderful colleagues at Michigan State who I still collaborate with here now, and it's great to have that resource. We're neighbors. They're only 4 hours north of us. And I learned so much in my first job at Michigan State. I mean, I grew as a scientist. I grew professionally in a lot of different ways, and the people I got to interact with, there were just so many opportunities there. And so it was a hard decision to come to Purdue, but I was so excited about the aspect of a position where I could 100% focus on the SOTL side, that research component, and be able to the challenge of running helping to run an undergraduate program. And we've gone through a curriculum review since I've been here, and we're implementing that now and coming up with how do you assess it. Those were things that really excited and challenged me. So I was sad to leave, but really excited about the potential opportunity that Purdue had for me. But it's great though, those relationships, they stay, and it's great when I get to collaborate with my old colleagues, or still my colleagues, but those relationships were there. But it was tough. And I think when you have a career change anytime, I think there's a lot of, because the unknown, right? So some people are really good with change and they embrace it. And other people like myself, are a little bit more hesitant with change, and some, depending on the circumstance. We have a family as well. So picking up a family and moving them, there's lots of things that go into, is it the right time to move? And for me and my family, it was the right time. So it was a great decision. I'm really happy here at Purdue.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I know one thing I struggled with in the past, and that was, when my own career changes have come up, is you look back and you think about the long hours and the hard work and the training. And I had to get past the thought process that I'm turning my back on what I've learned before, what I've done before. But then once I've gone into these new positions, you realize how much you still draw on problem-solving skills and critical thinking, all the things that that you've learned before. So
yeah, the quantitative. I mean, I was a trained scientist in more the quantitative aspect, and moving here allowed me to really explore the social science side of research and all the things that go in with working with humans versus, your cows. When you go out, I can tell you what they ate that day, how much they ate, what they did every hour of the day. And so social science, that's been, not a negative struggle, but that's what I've been learning is really what are the different research methods when you're talking about qualitative studies, or how do you analyze the data differently in a quantitative aspect when you're developing surveys, and how do you develop surveys that are, and so for me, and my graduate students working with me, I mean, that's been part of my learning over the last several years here is taking my training of the basic scientific method that we all learn as scientists, and how do I apply what I've already learned, but then there's this whole other science out there that I dabbled in at Michigan State, but I mean, I really made it here what I wanted to go through my promotion and tenure process on, and And so, but that's where I think you learn as as you grow professionally, like you find the colleagues that you can work with, that they're the experts in that area. They can help guide you as you're going, and you learn along the way. But the first time I did some real true institutional review board human research, it was a little bit of a struggle because I was used to, your animals, you kind of know what they're doing and when they're doing it. And it's different.
That's right.
It's very different. So
It is. It is. You mentioned the curriculum review a couple minutes ago, and you've published on this process. And I think just a phenomenal publication, a tremendous guide for any department that's wanting to, that's probably not the right way to phrase it, needing to undertake this process. So do you want to talk about that publication just a bit, and just so folks know that it's out there and what it contains?
Yeah, so the publication we were looking at, it goes through our process for a 3-year curriculum review that we had within our department and how we structured that. So at the beginning of the curriculum review, it was really important to me that everybody had a voice in it. It didn't matter if you were a teaching appointment or research or extension, that we all, everybody had an opportunity to have their voice heard in the process. So we worked to just divide up the faculty to give everybody, and we also included our staff members. If you were an instructor or you're part of the department, you were included on these teams. We also worked with resources on campus like our Center for Instructional Excellence, because they have the true experts who do this on a daily basis. But we went and got outside, we evaluated our current curriculum. We really developed a whole new set of learning outcomes. So we have 700 undergrads. So when they graduate, what should they all be able to do, regardless of their concentration or where they decided to focus? If they're an animal sciences major, what should they know? And we started there and we wrote those. We hadn't had those up to that point. So we really talked about those. We evaluated our current classes and which classes met those outcomes, which ones weren't. And when we did that curriculum mapping, we were able to identify, you'd hear some of the senior faculty complaining that taught the senior level courses. Well, students just aren't doing this. Like they're not seeing it. And those of us who teach the intro courses were like, well, we don't know why, but doing that mapping, it became really clear that, well, we're expecting them to jump on their ability to do these outcomes, but we're not guiding them through their classes to do that. So we were able to use that as evidence to redesign our curriculum. We sent surveys to alumni, to industry. So we asked for external feedback as well. And then ultimately, it was a very deliberate 3-year process to do it, but I'm really excited that we implemented it in, let's see here, it would have been in 21, was the first group that went through. So they're now starting their junior year. And so as part of that, we're now focusing on the assessment, because now that we built it, how do we know it's working? And evidence-based, like that's everything that we're trying to do, is how do we measure whether or not it's working. And we need to make changes, because the curriculum's we don't want it to just sit the next 10 years and never change. So what do we need to do to just make sure that we make changes along the way, recognize that maybe there were things we could have done better, and then how do we change those? But we really focused a lot on it with also giving students more autonomy to pick which direction they wanted to go. Like, there's some courses that everybody just has to have. That's just part of being an animal science major. But if they're interested in something, we give them that freedom to pick a little bit more in that area. And then we also focused on exposing them earlier to the different disciplines within animal science, because some of our students would get their junior, senior year and take a meat science course for the same time and fall in love with it, but they just missed out on the opportunity to do more of it in their program. So a lot more of earlier on taking the time to make sure that they're more aware of their different options in the intro level. That way they give that more autonomy when they move up in their program. So it's still early, so I can't tell you. I'm so far what we've collected, it looks like everything's going on track, and we're excited about it. But yeah, it was a 3 years, but I think there's there's ways that anybody who's looking to evaluate their curriculum, there's some things you could do to condense it. We felt for us that worked. That was the best way to make sure we did a process that kind of went the way that we were, and the outcomes that we were hoping for. Yep.
Absolutely. And I think it is important. I mean, whether it's whatever the time frame, to take the time that's needed. You rush through it, you try to take shortcuts, and it's just not going to give you the outcomes that you could have had if you take your time.
And it's very easy to say, like, well, I had to do it this way, so I had to take all these classes, so why doesn't everybody have to take those? And we talked a lot about that, like, just because an animal science program always had it this way, is that the way we still have to do it? We did a lot of evaluations of, like, our peer animal science programs to also see, like, what courses are they offering, you know, and so we had a lot of conversation about, does this particular class need to be included as a requirement? Does this have to be, like, does everybody have to graduate with this knowledge in all of these areas? And we're all passionate about our respected disciplines. And so it was some pretty healthy debating back and forth. But we finally, we agreed and everybody voted, and we're moving forward with it. So,
oh, that's great. Yeah, I think part of what I reflect on from time to time is thinking back how there were things that if I didn't know them coming out of my undergraduate program, it was going to take some real effort and time to find that information. But now there's so much information at our fingertips, you can almost take a different approach and, really thinking more about helping students learn how to find information, understand what they're finding, think critically. And the memorization stuff, probably not quite as important as what it used to be.
Yes, agree.
Yeah. Well, let's move into, some of the challenges, and we don't have to get too fixated just on the challenge side, but I think it's important to recognize some of the challenges with teaching, working with students as we see students change, because I think certainly whatever time frame we want to put on it, there have been changes in students and their approach to learning, what they know about learning. So what would you say are some of the greatest challenges that you face, or you feel like people in higher education in general are facing?
I mean, I think one of the areas, we did see, I think, a change a little bit in the students post-COVID. So we've had lots of conversations about how that period of time impacted students the first few years after. And we noticed for a while that students were quieter in class. There was just a change. Those of us, especially that teach first-year classes, where we all, across the university too, not just animal science, but when we all came back to campus, this is the first year, to be honest, that we're all like, wow, the freshmen are so engaging, and there's more of an excitement. And so we're we're happy to see that. Yes. But I think for instructors, we talk a lot about like the learner-centered, or getting away from that traditional PowerPoint, which is really hard for some, because that's how I went to school. I went to school sitting there quietly, watching PowerPoints, listening to my instructors. In some of my upper level classes, there was maybe a little bit more discussion if it was smaller, but in my larger classes, there wasn't as much of that. And a lot of us, that's how we learned, right? And I think what we're finding is from the people that are doing the educational research and, the College of Ed, that's not the best way necessarily for everybody to learn. So a challenge now, I think, is how do we implement different instructional tools in your classes and different assignments, and how do you engage the students? Because if the students aren't interested and don't see the value in what you're trying to teach them, they're going to tune out. They're not going to remember. But if they get excited in your class, if they can see, why is this relevant to me? Then I think you have them hooked, and then you're able to engage with them more and get them excited about what they're doing. And I think we still, though, fall back often into that PowerPoint where I'm just going to passively share information with you. But we know that a lot of students don't learn that way. And even if they're retaining the material, are they getting excited about the material? And if they're not excited about it, and that interest isn't piqued, they're going to move on. And they're not going to want to either stay in your major, or when we talk about the poultry industry, like trying to get more students interested in it. If they don't have positive experiences and interactions in classes with it, they're most likely not going to pursue it. So that's a challenge right now. I think that we're seeing is how do we do this, and how do we get students exposed to all the other aspects in the industry and get them excited and willing, at least, to engage with it.
Yeah, it's tough, and moving away from PowerPoint it's hard. Yeah, because you get attached, and you have I've already got all these resources, and coming up with new things can be difficult. But when you stumble onto an active learning strategy that really works, it's so exciting in the classroom, and it makes it worth it. Yeah,
and so many more campuses are starting active learning classrooms that you can use. I know of several, even animal science programs that have recently built new buildings, and they purposely put active learning classrooms in there. We have an active learning classroom here in our building, which is just all animal sciences. Our university even has a whole building that's just active learning classrooms. And actually, my class with 180, I teach in the largest one in the university. We're fortunate enough to get in there for class. And it's a game changer. You get away from that stadium style seating where you can't walk down the aisles, and students can't really interact with each other. It changes up. I mean, the minute they step in that classroom environment, it really changed. That's part of it, how it's structured and the actual physical aspect of the classroom, that impacts learning. I think the other challenge that we're looking at too is increasing ways as instructors to increase inclusivity in our classrooms, making sure that sense of belonging is there for all students, and what are things as an instructor that I can do to facilitate that. And we've had more discussions about that, in our department. But to me, that's really important, because I want students, I don't care what, they come with different backgrounds, both in their backgrounds with animal agriculture, but all these other different backgrounds. Everybody has a place in that classroom. So how do you, as an instructor, let them know that from the very beginning, this is an inclusive environment? So that's pretty important to me. And we've had faculty a lot of conversation about that.
Yep. Yeah, definitely at the forefront of a lot of discussions, lots of places that, how to do that. Yep. I did want to ask, and before we move into maybe more poultry-specific topics, but I did want to ask, how are you approaching the artificial intelligence tools that students have? That's been one of my greatest challenges teaching a writing class, figuring out what to do with this. Yeah,
so I've taken the approach that it's here. And in some ways, it's going to be a resource that's going to be really positive for students to use. And in other ways, it may not be appropriate to use. So I've taken that approach that I openly talk. It gets in my syllabus. I talk to the students about what's an appropriate use of it. And when you do use it, how do you cite that you're using it? And then what's not going to be for my class, my expectations, and appropriate use of it. So I let them utilize it in certain contexts within the constraints that we have for the class. But I did that because it's here to stay. And I think we're only going to be, it's another tool in some aspects. So how do we teach our students to utilize that tool versus saying, no, you're not allowed to use it, we're not doing anything? Because in some contexts, there is a place for it. But I think we need to define that really well for the students, because they're learning too what's appropriate. And that being said, we certainly have students that sometimes don't follow those guidelines and use it for other things. But I feel like working with them and providing those guidelines, it helps them know, what's appropriate for that course and what's not. Because it's here, and we need to, I think, embrace it and figure out how we're going to work with it.
Yeah, I saw a shift in just a few short months, and I allow it for use in my writing class for some specific purposes. And the shift went from students saying, hey, we want to be able to use this, and we work toward that, to some students saying, I don't want to use this. We're trying to use it in discussions and doing activities with it, and they're like, I don't want to use it. And so I'm trying.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's been a 180 for quite a few of the students, and I don't necessarily want to force them to use it, but I'm in the same camp. It's a technology I suspect they're going to have to use in their future careers. Yep. And so trying to help them.
I wonder if they're more likely to, because you're so open about being able to use it, then maybe trying it out more, knowing that it's an okay thing to do in the class, and then realizing it's not for them, versus if you were to say never use it, you're not allowed. So I think, giving them that space to try it. But it's interesting that then they reach that conclusion, right? Like, I don't want to use it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I found really early on saying you're not allowed to use it. It's like putting up the button that says don't push this button, or don't go in this room. Those things just aren't effective. Yeah.
They're going to use it. It's out there, but
that's right. That's right. All right. Well, when it comes to the poultry industry specifically, and I know you've done quite a bit of work on how can we increase interest. I think you've looked at pre-college programs, things that we can do before students even get to college. So share some of your thoughts on that. How do we help students develop an interest in careers in poultry or in the poultry industry?
Yeah, so I've come to the conclusion from teaching an intro class for several years now that students come, we've collected some data on this across different institutions. Students come with this perception of poultry, many of them do, and they're already closed off to considering careers and opportunities before they come to us. And so from those observations, and then working with others from across the U.S. to collect data from their intro courses, and seeing that, it really made us start wondering, okay, there's things we definitely can do to expose them in the first year and in their program, which we are doing that. But what about that K through 12? What is it about the younger still in school, before they come to higher ed? What can we do there? And so when we were really looking, there's some really great poultry resources out there for teachers to use or for H leaders to use, but they're still limited, and there's not enough. And so we looked at that and we said, okay, what can we do to potentially start programs for 4th and 5th graders, right? Because if career identity starts in elementary school, can we at least expose them earlier on? Because we know if somebody, like if you do an activity that you're not familiar with and it gets you excited, and then maybe like the next week you do something in that same area topic again, and it gets excited, that over time that leads to you actually having like a sustained interest in that topic. So the idea with this K through 12 programs that we have is how can we provide teachers resources that'll expose a student multiple times to poultry, but be able to then measure, and part of our research is measuring, do those modules and the programs, does that impact the students' overall interest in poultry science or their awareness and knowledge, because it varies a lot based on their backgrounds and the people they interact with at home, and what they see and they hear on TV or online. So we also addressed it more looking at STEM, because we wanted it to be something that we would be able to get like a biology teacher to pick up, not just somebody who's interested in agriculture, but be able to use it as a way that somebody who's more interested in increase interest in STEM, they could also do. So the programs we created are the poultry. We have 2 egg programs, a poult program, and then we also have an animal health program. And so, which is poultry as the context for that. But that's really what our goal was to try to develop these different programs and develop a website that we could share these resources that we are using the evidence with the collection of the data to see, did it do what we said it was going to do? Give teachers more resources because they don't always have enough to do it. And so how do we just start getting them exposed earlier on to their programs? And we aligned all of our programs with like state standards and some national ag literacy standards, because teachers in K through 12, I mean, you need to make sure you're aligning it with standards. So we provide some of that as well to teachers so that they can see where might it fit in our curriculum. And I'm really excited because our website is going to be live any day now, that has all the programs available for everybody to just access and use if they would like. So
wonderful. That website will be, can people find that through going to Purdue, will that be part of your website on?
So it's not going to be a Purdue website, but we're going to get it linked to my website. So I think it actually is going live today. So I wish it was live this morning. This is perfect timing for when it's going to be up and running. But it will I can provide that link with you, and it should be linked to my homepage soon at Purdue. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, I think that sounds phenomenal. And I mean, teachers just are not going to have the time, and for most of them, the background to develop these things on their own. They're just, that would be a tough ask, I think, for most teachers. So having those things available, that's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's our goal, is to make it as easy as possible for teachers to be able to implement it and give them the resources so that they can feel confident and the self-efficacy, and being able to feel like I can implement this in my classroom. And so we're hoping, our plan is to also start working on some more, like we're going to continue to build on these programs. I'm hoping maybe to do a duck program next, because Indiana is number one in duck production. So it's missing on my website. So that's, I think, our next focus is going to be trying to do something with ducks. So
great. And I think young people would enjoy that. That's something different. I mean, as little exposure as they have to chickens and turkeys, I'm sure most have virtually none with ducks.
Yeah. And we found, like, the students absolutely love, like, simulation games. So we work with a center here on campus. So all of our programs have some type of at least one, like, simulation game. Like for the turkey program for elementary school students, they actually, like, if you remember the old school bus cartoons where they got in the school bus and you basically get to pick what feed particle you want to be, and you get to go through on a backpack mission through the digestive system of a turkey, and learn along the way. And it's all geared right to that age group too, to try to get them excited. We have a high school one where they actually have to make decisions about how many birds might you put in the space, how many waters, what enrichment, and then what might that do to your egg production. So students can kind of compete against each other, like, oh, look, I got this when you only got this, and why was that different? They get into the simulation games. Those are definitely a positive to include those.
Yeah. Oh, that's fun. And we know, a little bit about that in the college classroom. The same things can apply. There's lots of tools you can use, get a little bit of that competition going. And
some of my high school module simulation games I use in my first year freshman class at Purdue, because it fits really well, and it doesn't take up a lot of time, and it gets them engaging and talking and competing against each other.
Right.
So.
Oh, very good. Last thing I wanted to ask before we kind of move into, because our time has gone so fast, but before we move into the final three questions, but I wanted to get your opinion on how the level of study skills that students are coming in with, because we're finding here students really just have not been taught how to study. They just lack some of the skills needed. They may be spending time, so we try to be careful not telling them, you just need to work harder. It may be just working differently or using strategies that work better. But are you finding that area to be a challenge as well, study skills?
Yeah, especially the first year students coming in. There's lots of stress this first semester. In fact, it's funny you brought that up, because I had class this morning. It's our last class before their final. And we spent about 20 minutes going over some more ideas on how you can study. They're really concerned about the cumulative portion of the exam. How do you study for that? We had some TAs make videos for the course. Our undergrad TAs, they made videos that we shared on their suggestions. But we have seen that quite a bit. There's a lot of stress and anxiety around how do you study, or we found that students, ways that worked in high school just don't work here. So we talk a lot about engaging with their peers to practice studying. Like, if you can explain something to somebody and teach them it, that's probably the best way to know what you know or don't know. A lot of them are still reading text or highlighting, right? And we know that for a lot of students does not help with retention of material. And so throughout the semester with the first years, we're always giving them, like, have you thought about trying this, or try doing this when you're studying, or what are some things that have been really helpful for previous students that were in your shoes? And so I think that helps a little bit. I mean, we've definitely seen improvement with the grades as like exam grades as the semester has gone. I focus a lot more on low stakes assignments versus high stakes like exam. And I made that transition during COVID when there's a lot of discussion among instructors nationally as, do we need to be doing as much of these high stakes assignments and high stakes the exams and these really large point assignments that if a student for whatever reason doesn't do well on, and do they really let them demonstrate what they know? And so I cut back on, I still give the same number of exams, but they're not worth point wise, percentage wise in the class nearly as much. It's a lot more group activities that we do in class, case studies, like smaller quizzes, things that kind of force them to stay engaged with the material. And I kept that since COVID, since that 2020 fall that I taught the class that way. And I think that's been I was a little resistant to do that. I don't know why, looking back. But so many people tried it and had positive responses, and there were papers published on it. And I was like, I'm going to give it a go. And I'm really happy I did, because I think it gives them another opportunity to let us show them what they know, and not this high stakes sit in an exam. Because some students just they know it. They just don't excel in that capacity. So
yeah, that's right. And I'm not sure how many exams I would want to take at this point.
No, every time I do one, I'm actually really happy I don't have to take them anymore.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
It's time for our famous 3. Evonik Animal Nutrition is committed to ensure food security and safety while reducing the ecological footprint of animal farming. Its products and services use evidence-based solutions that seek to promote animal welfare and reduce reliance on natural resources. All this is underpinned by long-standing industry partnerships and deep customer understanding. Evonik's focus on efficiency, sustainable, healthy nutrition, and collaborations with livestock farming partners creates value for customers and consumers.
Well, it's been great conversation, but I want to be respectful of your time. And so let's move into the last 3 questions that we like to ask a lot of our guests. And the first is, do you have a favorite poultry-related book or resource? Or, it can be anything poultry-related.
So I was trying to think of this, what I might have. I spend a lot of time looking online for youth resources for poultry and different case studies and things that I can use in my class. To be honest, I haven't quite found a favorite one. I mean, they're out there, but none that I would maybe say is my favorite. But for poultry, I mean, that's I try to stay up to date on what maybe papers have been published in the area, education related, like with using poultry or popular press, but I don't have a really good answer for you today on that. Because I mean, that's more, I enjoy kind of seeing what other people put out there. And sometimes that's a good way to connect with them too, like reach out to the author and learn what they were doing. But I don't have a particular piece that I make sure that I sit down, and besides just reading poultry science journals and that sort of.
Yeah. Well, I think the nature of your position and your career is such that there's just not likely to be that one thing. You're going to have to draw from a lot of places to do the things that you're trying to do, for sure. Yeah.
I read higher education journals, like the Chronicles and some of those. I like to keep up on those, because those are really good to just see get new ideas and see what people are doing. And I enjoy doing that. That I do more frequently, for sure.
Yeah. And so that's kind of a non-poultry related resource. That's our next question. Just, the kind of the go-tos if you have a favorite non-poultry resource.
Yeah. Professional non-poultry is probably those broader higher education journals that are just sort of that are written both peer-reviewed journal articles, but also just the more easy to read, like a magazine, sit down, popular press, and see what's going on. I think that's good to do. Personally, when I'm just trying to decompress from work and not read anything related to work, I really like reading Runner's World. I used to read all the time when I was younger, just picking up books. My daughter reads all the time. And somewhere along the line, professionally, throughout my life, I have stopped doing that from a personal standpoint. But I can still pick up a Runner's World and I enjoy reading. I mean, it's just a time to just read something that's not work related.
Yeah. Hey, that can be important sometimes, for sure.
It is.
Yeah. Do you ever find, I know when I try to stay fairly tuned in to the higher education journals and just what's going on there, but sometimes I find myself from week to week almost wanting to completely change everything I'm doing. So I really have to be careful about how often I'm looking at
innovative people out there that are just doing some really cool things, and you hear weird. And that's when you go to, I go to Poultry Science every summer, but I have a professional NACTA, North American College of Teachers of Agriculture. And I love going there because there are some awesome things that people are doing that you can talk to them about, or you can read about. And so you have to, you do have to be careful. What do you want to try in your class? Because there's so many cool things that you could do and try. And there's some really cool things people do out there. So.
Right. That's right. Well, our last question is just your advice, because I know, not if you work with students, when you work with students, because you work with students a lot. What advice do you have for someone, or for a student in particular, who may be interested in getting into an animal-related career, or even a poultry-related career specifically?
Yeah, so with poultry, more specifically, I teach an introduction to, we call it Cracking the Poultry Industry course. And it's a 1-credit course that's just meant to expose students. So I try to tell all my students, even if they have no interest in poultry, I'm like, or just want to go to vet school, to be honest, I'm like, what? It's not going to hurt anything to explore. Don't be afraid to try new things. Like if you think you might not know, you have this path set out for you, but you don't know where you're going to end up. So I think a lot of students shy away because they're nervous to try something new, or they don't want to do it. And I'm like, just try it, go work in a research lab. And if you don't like it, that's okay. Like, go do an internship. And if you hate it or you really didn't like it, that's okay. Because now that's not where you want to end up, at least initially for your first job, right? So I think just encouraging them to not be afraid to try things, and letting them know that it's okay not to like it once you try it. Like, don't keep doing something don't do it for 2 days and then stop. But if you've done something and you've really invested in it and it's just not for you. And I think I try to think back to when I was in school, and it feels like it's getting longer and longer ago. But just trying to remember what I was like, and not maybe being resistant to wanting to try things, and how do you get the students to do that? So I focus a lot on that, and I talk to them a lot about just try it. Come to the meeting, come to this. And our poultry class is really exciting because most of the students that take it, they just want to learn a little bit more about it, about the industry. And it's a great chance to expose them more. And so many students, and we've collected some data on it, go through the class and leave more likely to at least consider a career in poultry than they did when they started. So, and
even if the outcome is just more informed consumers, that's well worthwhile. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Sometimes we have to remind our students, even in vet school, you're going to try new things, or else there's no point in going to vet school, right? Yep. You have to have that mindset of being willing to do things, to do new things. Yeah.
And it's okay to fail, right? Like, you may fail at something, like you may not be good at something. And I think students are so worried about failing something and not being, the best at it. And so I think allowing them to give them that space that it's okay. It's okay to fail something. Like, I have this conversation with my high schooler all the time. You can try these things and you may not be successful at them, and that's okay. Like, but if you never try them, how do you know? So.
Yeah. Well, very good advice. Greatly appreciate that. And thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. It's been a great conversation. I look forward to our future interactions discussing things in the curriculum and teaching side. It's definitely a shared passion. I'm learning late in my career, but nevertheless, I'm learning more and more about it all the time, and just a great area. And we're thankful for people like you who do scholarship in the area, that it's not just, develop a technique and keep it to yourself, but you're willing to take the time to do the research and to share those results. And that's very, very meaningful. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks very much for the invitation. Thank you.
Yeah. And thanks to everyone out there listening and watching our conversation with Liz Karcher, professor at Purdue University. We hope everybody has a great day, and thank you so much for your time.